You call that karate? The MMA fighter grinned, fists raised, his voice echoing through the roaring cage. He didn't know the man who just stepped in had fought wars without medals, won fights without cameras, and didn't miss. One punch later, silence fell over the arena. Welcome to Jack Reacher Heroics. Let's uncover what really happened. The packed arena buzzed with anticipation, every eye glued to the octagonal cage at the center. The young MMA fighter stood in the spotlight, muscles gleaming with sweat, his chest rising and falling as he soaked in the roaring crowd. His confidence was as loud as the chants that filled the air, the arrogance in his smirk unmistakable. Tonight wasn't just another fight. It was a show, a chance to prove he was untouchable, the undisputed king of the underground fighting world. But something was missing. The spotlight wasn't just on him. Whispers had been circulating for weeks, rumors of a man from the shadows, someone who didn't seek fame but possessed a deadly skill set. Jack Reacher. Known more for his quiet intensity than his fighting, Reacher was an enigma. No one really knew what he was capable of, but everyone sensed he was more than just a legend. With the crowd at fever pitch, the fighter grabbed a microphone, pacing the cage like a predator sizing up his prey. His voice cut through the noise, sharp and taunting. "I've heard all the stories about this Jack Reacher," he sneered, "that he's some kind of tough guy, a black belt in karate, or whatever. But where is he? I've been waiting. If he's so tough, why doesn't he step up? Let's see if the legend is real." His words sparked a wave of murmurs and gasps. Some fans cheered the bravado. Others exchanged uneasy glances. This was no ordinary challenge. It felt like a gauntlet thrown down to a ghost, a call for a confrontation that few expected to see. The arena lights dimmed briefly as the crowd hushed, waiting for a response that might never come. The fighter's grin stretched wider as he basked in the mix of excitement and tension. He didn't just want to fight. He wanted to break the myth, to prove that Reacher was nothing but a story. But somewhere beyond the noise, beyond the crowd, eyes watched quietly, unblinking. Jack Reacher had heard the challenge, and he was ready. Jack Reacher's world was a stark contrast to the roaring arena and flashing cameras. Far from the noise and spectacle, he lived a quiet life on the outskirts of a small town, where the days moved slow and the nights stretched long under open skies. His home was simple, a modest cabin tucked among towering pines, with no luxury, no distractions. Just the essentials, a worn-out chair, a battered table, and walls lined with books and faded photographs hinting at a past filled with discipline and unspoken battles. Each morning began the same way. Reacher woke before dawn, the chill of the early air brushing against his skin as he stepped outside. His breath formed thin clouds in the cold as he moved with deliberate calm through the empty woods. No music, no chatter, just the sound of his footsteps on the forest floor and the steady rhythm of his own breathing. These moments were his meditation, a way to clear the noise of the world and focus inward. He kept his body as sharp as his mind, running miles on winding trails and practicing practiced movements that spoke of years dedicated to mastery. His black belt in karate wasn't a trophy or a brag. It was a discipline, a part of who he was. The quiet strength beneath his calm exterior was forged in countless hours of solitude and training. Though Reacher avoided attention, the world sometimes found him. People who knew fragments of his story whispered about the man who could dismantle threats without raising his voice. Yet he never sought fame or fights. His life was simple by choice, a balance of solitude and readiness, a constant preparation for whatever might come. That evening, as twilight bled into night, Reacher sat on his porch, a steaming cup of tea in hand. The challenge he'd heard earlier flickered in his mind like a distant flame. The arrogant fighter's words echoed faintly, a call he couldn't ignore. Quiet though he was, Reacher knew the world still demanded action from him, and when the time came, he would answer. Stories about Jack Reacher traveled quietly, like shadows slipping through crowded rooms and smoky bars, shared in hushed tones by those who had glimpsed his past. In the dim corners of gyms and fight clubs, old trainers and fighters spoke of a man whose skills were more legend than fact, a ghost who never stayed long, but left a mark impossible to forget. Whispers told of his black belt in karate, earned not in flashy tournaments, but in grueling dojos where discipline was absolute and failure meant humiliation. They spoke of a fighter who didn't need to shout or show off, someone whose calm demeanor masked a lethal precision, able to end a fight with a single, perfectly timed strike. Among those who crossed paths with Reacher, the tales varied. Some described him as an enforcer for justice, stepping into dangerous situations with an unyielding sense of right. Others remembered a lone wanderer, passing through towns like a storm, leaving silence and respect behind. No one doubted his ability to handle himself, not because he bragged, but because he rarely lost. In the fight world, the rumors were enough to stir both respect and fear. Fighters who relied on raw power and intimidation felt uneasy knowing there was someone out there whose strength came from years of disciplined training and quiet confidence. The fact that Reacher never sought the spotlight only added to his mystique. Even the arrogant young MMA fighter had heard these whispers. Some scoffed, dismissing them as old man tales, but others grew wary. The stories painted a picture of a man who didn't fight for glory or money. He fought because he had to, and when he did, he was unstoppable. As the challenge circulated through the underground scene, those who knew Reacher expected something different. They anticipated a confrontation not marked by noise or spectacle, but by calm control and skill honed through a lifetime of dedication. The whispers were not just about his past. They were a warning of what was to come. The young MMA fighter's reputation was a force that swept through the fighting world like wildfire. From underground gyms to packed arenas, his name was synonymous with dominance and bravado. He was a rising star, a whirlwind of aggression and power who rarely left a fight standing. And when he did, it was with his hand raised high, smirking and taunting every opponent he defeated. His style was flashy and ruthless. He thrived on the spectacle, using every moment in the cage to assert not just victory, but complete control. His punches came fast and hard, his kicks sharp and calculated, but it was his psychological game that set him apart. Trash talk was his weapon, a way to unsettle his foes before the first bell even rang. He basked in the crowd's cheers and jeers alike, feeding off the energy like a predator stalking prey. Behind the scenes, stories circulated of his unrelenting training regimen and iron will. Coaches spoke of his obsession with perfection. Every strike drilled until it was flawless, every move rehearsed until instinctive. Yet there was an edge, a dark hunger in his eyes that unsettled even those closest to him. He wasn't just fighting to win. He was fighting to prove something, to silence any doubts about his place at the top. Opponents described him as cocky, sometimes reckless, but always dangerous. He had a way of making fights personal, breaking spirits as much as bodies. Some feared him, others respected him, but no one ignored him. The fighter's rise had been meteoric, fueled by social media hype and viral knockouts that made him a household name among fight fans. Interviews showed a man who reveled in the spotlight, unafraid to stir controversy or challenge legends. When the whispers of Jack Reacher began to surface, many dismissed the idea that someone so composed and quiet could match his ferocity. Yet the fighter's reputation carried one flaw: arrogance. He believed that sheer force and bravado would always win. That belief set the stage for a reckoning few expected, but everyone awaited. A battle that would challenge everything he thought he knew about strength and control. The fighter's taunts had been growing louder with each passing week, fueling a firestorm of attention that spread beyond the usual circles. At every fight, every interview, every public appearance, he pushed the envelope further, mocking rivals, belittling legends, daring anyone to challenge him. His confidence bordered on arrogance, and it captivated the crowd while alienating many. But this time, he crossed a line that even his most loyal fans couldn't ignore. During a post-fight celebration streamed live, he singled out Jack Reacher by name for the first time. His words were sharp, almost mocking, laced with disdain. Reacher thinks he's some kind of karate master? Where is he? Hiding in the shadows? I'm here, front and center. If he's real, let him show up. Otherwise, he's just a ghost story. The statement spread like wildfire, igniting debates across fight forums, social media, and insider circles. Some saw it as bold showmanship, others as reckless provocation. The fighters' camp reveled in the attention, but whispers of concern rippled through those who knew Reacher's quiet strength. For Reacher, the word struck a chord. He was not one to seek out conflict, but this wasn't just talk. It was a challenge aimed directly at him. The disrespect wasn't just personal. It threatened to stir a storm that Reacher had long avoided. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, a determination sparked. The arrogance of the fighter was exactly the kind of confrontation that demanded a response. The fighter's provocations weren't just bluster anymore. They were a gauntlet thrown down in public, daring Reacher to step into the light. For the young fighter, it was a game, a way to cement his dominance by facing a legend and proving him wrong. But for Reacher, it was a moment to decide whether to remain in the shadows or reclaim the respect his skill had earned long ago. The world watched, waiting for Reacher's answer, unaware that beneath the surface, a quiet storm was gathering, one that would shake the very foundation of the fight world. Jack Reacher's training was nothing like the flashy workouts the young fighter boasted about. There were no crowds, no cameras, no grand displays, just solitary discipline and focused intent. Each movement was deliberate, a product of decades of experience rather than fleeting trends. In the quiet of his cabin, Reacher went through his routines with precision. He started with stretching, muscles loosening under the pale morning light filtering through the window. Then came the kata, a series of fluid, controlled movements practiced until they became second nature. Each stance, each strike, was executed with a calm sharpness, reflecting a mastery far beyond mere technique. His hands moved with the grace of a sculptor, carving invisible patterns in the air, each gesture purposeful. Reacher's breathing was steady, controlled, a rhythm that anchored his mind and body. He wasn't training to impress. He was honing skills honed in countless real fights, moments where split-second decisions meant survival. Beyond physical practice, Reacher meditated on strategy and awareness. He visualized encounters, anticipating moves, and countering with practiced ease. His mind was as disciplined as his body, sharpening focus on the intangible qualities that set a true fighter apart: patience, timing, and control. The black belt he wore was not a symbol of vanity, but a testament to years of dedication and hardship. It was earned in silence, far from the noise of stadiums and cheering crowds. Each day, Reacher trained not for glory, but to be ready, to face whatever challenge might come, without hesitation or doubt. As the sun climbed higher, Reacher moved to shadowboxing, his strikes crisp and efficient. There was no wasted motion, no exaggerated theatrics, just clean, powerful technique backed by calm confidence. His body was a weapon, his mind a fortress. The young fighter's challenge echoed faintly in the background of Reacher's thoughts, but it was not a distraction, it was motivation. When the time came, Reacher would meet the challenge not with noise, but with undeniable skill and quiet strength. The underground fight scene thrived in the shadows, hidden from the polished glare of mainstream arenas. It was a gritty world of dimly lit warehouses, graffiti-stained walls, and crowds packed tight with anticipation. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and a low murmur of voices buzzing with excitement and tension. Tonight's venue was no different. Fighters, promoters, and fans gathered in a clandestine space where rules were loose and raw skill ruled. The crowd's energy was electric, a restless pulse that echoed off the concrete floors and rusted steel beams. Every fight was more than a contest. It was a proving ground for reputation and survival. The young MMA fighter was a fixture here, his name spoken with a mixture of awe and fear. As he stepped into the cage, the crowd erupted. Cheers and jeers collided, the atmosphere charged with a hunger for violence and spectacle. This was his domain, a place where his flashy style and ruthless tactics earned him respect and fear alike. Opponents lined up, eager for a shot at glory, but most left defeated, broken by his relentless assault. Cameras flashed in the shadows, capturing knockouts and taunts that would later flood social media, spreading his fame beyond the underground. Yet beneath the bravado, there was a hunger that never seemed satisfied. The fighter craved more than victories. He sought a challenge worthy of his growing legend. Each win was a step, but the next fight had to be bigger, more dramatic, a spectacle that would cement his place at the top. Rumors of Jack Reacher's name began weaving through the crowd like wildfire, stirring whispers of a challenger who didn't belong to this world. Some scoffed, dismissing the idea of a quiet man disrupting their arena. Others watched cautiously, sensing the tension beneath the bravado. Tonight, as the fighter flexed and mocked, the underground fight scene held its breath. The stakes were rising, and everyone knew a reckoning was approaching, one that could upend everything they thought they knew about power, skill, and respect in the cage. Jack Reacher sat alone in the dim light of his cabin, the quiet hum of the forest settling around him like a protective cloak. The challenge from the young fighter replayed in his mind, a ripple in his otherwise calm existence. Reacher wasn't a man who sought conflict, but the provocation was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the words. It was the arrogance behind them, the disrespect to his skill and discipline honed over decades. For a long moment, Reacher weighed his options. He could remain in the shadows, letting the storm pass without involvement. That was the way he had lived for years, quietly, deliberately, avoiding unnecessary battles. But something about this challenge unsettled him. The fighter's hunger for validation wasn't just personal. It threatened to distort what true strength meant. The young man's showmanship and bravado undermined the discipline and respect that defined real mastery. Reacher's fingers tightened around the worn edge of his training mat. This wasn't about ego. It was about setting a line, about reminding the world that strength came with responsibility. If he stayed silent, the fighter's arrogance would only grow, fueling a cycle of empty aggression and disrespect. With steady resolve, Reacher rose. The calm in his eyes deepened, not with anger, but with certainty. He would answer the challenge, not with words, but with action. The fight would not be a spectacle, but a demonstration of what true skill meant. No crowds, no flash, just two men testing the limits of their discipline and will. He packed his gear methodically, each motion deliberate. His training would intensify, sharpening every edge until he was ready. This was not a game. It was a responsibility he accepted with quiet grace. Outside, the forest whispered beneath the moonlight. Inside, Reacher prepared for a confrontation that would echo far beyond the cage, a reckoning that would remind the world of the difference between noise and true strength. The announcement came unexpectedly, rippling through fight forums and social media like a shockwave. Jack Reacher, the man no one expected to respond, had issued a public call out to the young MMA fighter. The message was simple, precise, and devoid of theatrics, a calm invitation that carried the weight of quiet confidence. In a short video posted online, Reacher appeared seated in a modest gym, his presence unassuming but unmistakably commanding. He spoke without anger or insult, his voice steady and measured. "I've heard the challenge. I accept. When you're ready to face real skill, I'll be there. No distractions, no games, just a fair fight." The fight world exploded. Fans and commentators debated the sudden development, the contrast between the fighter's brash arrogance and Reacher's composed acceptance sparking a frenzy of anticipation. Some questioned whether Reacher's response was a bluff. Others felt the tides were about to turn. The young fighter's camp scrambled to manage the narrative. Press conferences were called. Spokespeople issued statements trying to downplay the challenge, labeling Reacher as an outsider who couldn't compete. But the fighter himself seemed electrified by the prospect, his smirk widening as he prepared to face the man who had silently accepted his gauntlet. News outlets picked up the story, blending the mystery of Reacher's past with the spectacle of the upcoming showdown. Analysts speculated on what this fight would mean: a clash of styles, a battle between flash and discipline, youth and experience. Social media buzzed with memes, debates, and predictions, making the event one of the most anticipated in recent memory. Behind the scenes, Reacher remained unfazed. The public call-out was not about publicity, but about setting the stage for a confrontation that mattered. He continued training with quiet purpose, preparing to prove that true strength required more than noise. As the world waited, one thing was clear. The fight was no longer just a rumor. It was real, and when the time came, everything would change. The days leading up to the fight crackled with tension that spread like wildfire through every corner of the fight world. From the underground gyms to the glossy studios, every conversation circled the impending clash between the brash MMA fighter and the enigmatic Jack Reacher. The air was thick with anticipation and uncertainty, a palpable energy that seemed to vibrate beneath the surface of every venue and screen. The young fighters' camp ramped up preparations with fierce intensity, their confidence bolstered by the adrenaline of the challenge. Sparring sessions grew more brutal, strategies sharpened, and media appearances became increasingly charged with bravado. The fighter thrived in the spotlight, using every opportunity to mock and provoke, fueling the fire that lit fans' imaginations and media headlines alike. Meanwhile, Reacher maintained a steady calm, unaffected by the frenzy surrounding him. His training was meticulous, focused on precision and control. Old friends and allies checked in, offering counsel and subtle warnings, but Reacher's resolve only deepened. He moved with purpose, each day peeling away distractions and sharpening his focus to a razor's edge. The fight promoters capitalized on the growing buzz, announcing the venue and date amid swirling speculation about how the clash would unfold. The underground scene buzzed with renewed life as ticket sales soared and fighters debated who would emerge victorious. Social media exploded with polls, predictions, and heated arguments, dividing fans into camps. Press conferences became battlegrounds of words, where the fighters' smirks met Reacher's stoic silence. Each glance, each measured response, added layers to the mounting tension. Cameras captured the unspoken battles, the silent challenges exchanged before a single punch was thrown. In quiet moments away from the chaos, Reacher reflected on the weight of the upcoming fight. It wasn't just about victory or defeat. It was about legacy, respect, and the meaning of true strength. As the day of reckoning approached, the world held its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. Familiar faces appeared quietly around Jack Reacher in the days before the fight, friends and allies from his past who understood the weight of what lay ahead. They came with a mixture of respect and concern, knowing the young fighter's reputation and the storm that could erupt once the cage door shut. One evening, an old combat trainer arrived unannounced, a grizzled man with years of experience etched into the lines on his face. His eyes held the kind of knowledge only earned through countless battles. "You know what you're up against," he said quietly, sliding a worn leather-bound notebook across the table. "This kid's not just about power. He fights dirty, mentally and physically. Don't let the crowd's roar fool you." Reacher nodded, the weight of the warning settling in but not altering his resolve. He appreciated the caution, the careful advice grounded in hard-earned wisdom. The notebook contained strategies and observations from previous fights, moments where the young fighter exploited weaknesses and preyed on nerves. Another friend, a former sparring partner who had walked similar paths, shared his own insights. "He's fast, but impatient," she said, voice low. "He wants to prove himself, not just win. That hunger can be his undoing if you stay calm and make him fight your fight." The warnings were reminders of the danger lurking beneath the bravado. Reacher listened without ego or dismissal, accepting the knowledge as tools rather than obstacles. Each word added to the mosaic of preparation, deepening his understanding of the challenge. Yet beyond the tactical advice, the old friends brought something else, quiet encouragement. They reminded Reacher of the strength that came not just from fists, but from discipline, patience, and respect. They believed in his skill and his calm, qualities that had defined him long before the public spotlight. As the hours to the fight drew closer, these visits grounded Reacher, reinforcing the balance between caution and confidence. The path ahead was clear: face the challenge fully prepared, but without losing sight of what truly mattered. The young fighter paced restlessly in his training room, his mind a whirl of adrenaline and anticipation. Every muscle in his body was primed for battle, but it was his thoughts that churned the loudest. To him, this fight wasn't just about victory. It was a proving ground, a chance to silence the whispers about Jack Reacher and cement his legacy as the undisputed champion. He thrived on the energy of the crowd and the flash of cameras, believing that confidence and bravado could overwhelm any opponent. In his world, power and showmanship were intertwined, each fueling the other. The roar of fans, the jeers at his rivals, the spectacle of dominance. These were the tools he wielded as effectively as his fists. Yet beneath the swagger was a subtle tension, a flicker of doubt that he refused to acknowledge. Reacher's calm reputation unnerved him. The idea of facing someone so composed and disciplined was unfamiliar territory. This wasn't the kind of opponent he could bully or bait with insults. He was facing a man whose strength came from quiet confidence and experience, a stark contrast to his own fiery approach. He replayed every highlight of his past fights, reminding himself of his speed, his power, his unyielding aggression. He believed these would carry him through, that the younger fighter's heart and fury were enough to break any challenger. But as the days passed, that certainty began to waver. His coaches urged focus and strategy, warning against underestimating Reacher's skill. Still, the fighter's mindset was fixed on one thing: proving that he was more than just a showman, that he was a force to be reckoned with. The fight was a stage, and he was ready to perform, to dominate not just physically but psychologically. In moments of solitude, the fighter's mind flickered between confidence and uncertainty. He pushed the doubts away, steeling himself for the battle ahead. Whatever happened, he told himself, he would fight with everything he had, because losing was not an option. The night of their first encounter was charged with electric tension. Backstage at the arena, before the roaring crowd and flashing lights, Jack Reacher and the young fighter finally came face to face. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, every eye in the room sensing the unspoken challenge hanging between them. The fighter approached first, his grin wide and cocky, fueled by adrenaline and the cheers he'd already heard from the crowd. He was a whirlwind of energy, fists clenched, eyes locked on Reacher with a mixture of defiance and curiosity. "So, you're the quiet legend," he said, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's see if you can back it up." Reacher remained calm, his expression unreadable, eyes steady and unblinking. He didn't respond with words or gestures. His presence alone spoke volumes. His posture was relaxed but grounded, every inch the disciplined martial artist who had faced countless battles before. The fighter circled slowly, testing the waters, trying to provoke a reaction. He jabbed the air near Reacher, a show of speed and aggression meant to intimidate. But Reacher's response was measured, precise, a subtle shift in stance, a slight tightening of muscles, signaling readiness without haste. The contrast between them was stark. Where the fighter radiated heat and noise, Reacher was cool and silent, a still center in a storm. The room seemed to contract around them, the usual backstage chaos fading as if time itself had slowed. Though no blows were exchanged, the encounter was a battle in itself, a clash of wills, experience against youth, discipline against bravado. The fighter's smirk flickered as he realized this was no ordinary opponent, no easy victory. As they parted, a silent understanding passed between them. The fight ahead would be more than a contest of strength. It would be a test of character, strategy, and respect. The first encounter set the stage, not with words or violence, but with the unmistakable tension of two warriors ready to face their destinies. The terms of the fight were agreed upon with deliberate care, each detail scrutinized to ensure a battle of pure skill and honor. Neither Jack Reacher nor the young fighter wanted distractions or gimmicks. This would be a contest stripped down to its raw essentials. The cage would hold only the two men, with no referees to interfere and no flashy rules to tip the scales. The fighters and their teams met in a quiet room away from the cameras to discuss conditions. The young fighter insisted on no time limits, a fight to the finish where endurance and strategy would be tested without restraint. Reacher agreed, valuing the purity of a challenge that demanded patience and control rather than quick showmanship. Both sides insisted on a neutral venue, chosen for its simple layout and lack of extravagance. There would be no audience distractions, only a select few witnesses to honor the seriousness of the duel. No taunts, no crowd-driven theatrics. This was about respect as much as victory. Equipment was minimal. Gloves would be worn to protect hands, but nothing that would impede the flow of combat or the effectiveness of techniques honed over years. The fighters agreed to forego protective gear like headguards, emphasizing authenticity over safety to show true commitment. A key point was made to exclude judges or referees. The fight would end only by knockout, submission, or a clear concession. This rule underscored the gravity of the confrontation. There would be no compromises, no second chances. Each strike, each move, carried weight beyond the moment. The atmosphere in a room was calm, but intense as the rules were laid out and accepted. There was no room for arrogance or deception, just a mutual understanding that the fight was a sacred test of skill and will. When the terms were finalized, a quiet resolve settled over both fighters. The rules were not just guidelines, but a statement. This would be a battle where only true strength, discipline, and respect would prevail. The night before the fight was a study in contrasts. Two men preparing in worlds apart, yet bound by the same impending storm. In the quiet cabin where Jack Reacher resided, the evening air was cool and still. Reacher sat alone, methodically reviewing his mental notes, replaying strategies in his mind like a chess player envisioning every move. The silence was broken only by the soft crackle of a small fire and the rhythmic ticking of an old clock. Reacher's preparation was solemn and deliberate. He meditated deeply, centering himself, releasing tension with slow, controlled breaths. Every muscle, every nerve was attuned to the challenge ahead. He visualized the fight not as a spectacle, but as a test of focus and skill, a conversation between two warriors communicated through movement and precision. Sleep came easily, wrapped in calm confidence. Far from this stillness, the young fighter's night was filled with noise and celebration. Surrounded by friends, fans, and flashing cameras, he reveled in the attention. Laughter and loud music filled the space as his team toasted a victory, confident in the showmanship and power that had brought them here. The fighter's grin was wide, his energy electric, a stark contrast to Reacher's quiet resolve. Yet beneath the bravado, a flicker of tension gnawed at the fighter's mind. Alone for a moment, he stared into the dark, the weight of the challenge settling in. Doubts he tried to bury surfaced. The fear of facing a man whose reputation was built on calm mastery rather than bluster. But he shook it off quickly, returning to the crowd, fueled once again by the roar of approval. As midnight passed, the worlds of these two men existed in parallel, one embracing solitude and focus, the other surrounded by noise and confidence. Both knew that by morning, everything would change. Tomorrow, the cage would open and the fight would begin. The arena pulsed with energy as fight night arrived, every inch packed with an eager crowd buzzing with anticipation. Lights bathed the venue in vibrant colors, casting long shadows across the cage that sat gleaming at the center. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, excitement, and the unmistakable tension that precedes a battle of legends. Fans waved banners and shouted chants, their voices blending into a roaring tide that rolled through the seats like thunder. Cameras swiveled and flashed, capturing every moment for the millions watching beyond the walls. The atmosphere was electric, charged with expectation and the promise of something unforgettable. The young fighter made his entrance first, striding confidently down the ramp with a swagger that drew cheers and jeers alike. His muscles rippled under the bright lights, face set in a cocky grin that dared anyone to challenge him. He fed off the crowd's energy, throwing out punches and taunts, a showman ready to dominate. Minutes later, Jack Reacher appeared, calm, composed, and unyielding. Dressed simply, but with an undeniable presence, he walked with measured steps that seemed to draw the noise inward, pulling attention like gravity. No flash, no drama, just quiet authority. His eyes locked on the cage ahead, focused and steady, as if the world around him had already faded to silence. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been clearer. Where the fighter radiated heat and spectacle, Reacher embodied cool precision and control. The crowd sensed the tension, the electric charge before the storm, and the roar rose again, louder and more intense. As both men stepped into the cage, the world seemed to hold its breath. The bright lights, the watching eyes, and the thundering crowd all faded into the background. It was just two fighters standing face to face, ready to write the next chapter of their stories in sweat and strength. The fight was about to begin. The bell rang sharply, slicing through the roar of the crowd, signaling the start of the fight. The young fighter exploded forward with the energy of a storm, his movements fast and aggressive. His fists flew like pistons, jabs crisp and calculated, every strike aimed to overwhelm. He bounced lightly on his feet, eyes locked on Reacher, intent on setting the pace early and forcing his opponent on the defensive. Reacher stood his ground, shoulders loose, breathing steady beneath the pressure. His eyes measured, calm and unshaken, tracking every move with patient precision. He didn't rush or react wildly. Instead, he allowed the fighter's energy to flow around him like water around stone. Each swing the fighter threw sliced through empty air as Reacher subtly shifted stance, slipping just beyond reach with effortless grace. The young fighter's strikes came in relentless waves, a flurry of punches and kicks designed to break through defenses quickly. He tested Reacher with a sharp jab to the ribs, then a snap kick aimed at the thigh, trying to unsettle the veteran's rhythm. But Reacher responded not with brute force, but with subtle counters, a deft parry here, a slight sidestep there, each movement deliberate, conserving energy while chipping away at the fighter's momentum. The crowd watched breathless as the dynamic unfolded, raw power meeting quiet control. The fighter's face was a mask of focus and fury, his smirk fading as Reacher's calm presence absorbed and redirected his aggression. With every missed strike, frustration flickered in the fighter's eyes, while Reacher's expression remained unreadable, locked in a steady resolve. The opening exchanges set the tone for the battle. Not a chaotic brawl, but a dance of skill, strategy, and will. The fight had begun not with a roar, but with the quiet assertion that every move counted, and the true test was just unfolding. Reacher's defense was a masterclass in discipline and timing. Every move was measured, every reaction precise. He stood firm, his guard high but relaxed, ready to absorb or deflect the fighter's relentless assault without wasting energy or revealing weakness. His eyes never left his opponent, reading not just the strikes but the subtle tells in posture and rhythm. The young fighter launched a rapid series of punches, a blur of fists aiming for vulnerable spots. Reacher's hands moved like shadows, blocking with the flat of his palms or parrying just enough to redirect the force harmlessly away. Each defense was fluid, almost effortless, as if his body was reading the attacks before they even landed. When the fighter aimed a powerful hook to Reacher's ribs, Reacher twisted just enough to lessen the impact, his breath steady, unshaken. More than physical defense, Reacher's control over the fight's tempo was evident. He circled slowly, adjusting his distance with subtle footwork that kept him out of range, but always within striking distance. The fighter's frustration grew as his wild swings met only air or soft deflections. Reacher's calm endurance drained the young man's aggression, forcing him to expend energy chasing a target that remained just beyond reach. At one point, the fighter feinted a left jab, but quickly pivoted to deliver a spinning kick. Reacher anticipated the move, ducking low and stepping forward, closing the gap to intercept. His elbow rose sharply, catching the fighter's shoulder with a firm strike that staggered him briefly. The crowd gasped, sensing the shift in momentum. Reacher's defense was more than protection. It was a strategic dismantling of his opponent's confidence. By absorbing and countering without haste, he forced the fighter into mistakes, opening windows for his own measured attacks. The veteran's composed defense was a silent message. Power alone wouldn't win this fight. Skill, patience, and control ruled the cage. As the rounds progressed, the young fighter's energy wavered, his aggressive facade cracking under the weight of Reacher's unwavering defense. The battle was far from over, but the tide was unmistakably turning. The shift came quietly at first, barely perceptible amid the roar of the crowd and the rapid exchanges inside the cage. The young fighter's grin, once wide and cocky, began to falter as Reacher's calm precision started to dominate the rhythm. Each missed punch, each blocked strike chipped away at the fiery confidence that had carried him this far. Reacher sensed the change and seized the moment with unyielding focus. He moved like a shadow, striking not with brute force but with calculated accuracy. A sharp jab to the ribs slowed the fighter's breathing, followed by a swift parry that sent a powerful hook glancing harmlessly away. The veteran's counters were crisp and deliberate, designed to disrupt and disorient rather than overwhelm. The crowd's energy shifted, whispers of doubt mixing with renewed admiration. The young fighter's pace wavered, his movements growing less assured. He launched a desperate flurry, punches thrown harder but less precise, revealing cracks in his once impenetrable facade. Reacher's eyes narrowed, reading every sign of fatigue and frustration. In a decisive moment, Reacher feigned a retreat, drawing the fighter forward. The bait was irresistible. The younger man charged with renewed aggression, fists swinging wide and reckless. Reacher waited, steady and composed, before stepping forward with lightning speed. A precise elbow strike connected with the fighter's shoulder, forcing him back, gasping. The momentum had clearly turned. The fighter's breaths grew heavier, his guard faltering. Reacher pressed the advantage, landing a clean jab to the ribs that made the crowd gasp. Every strike was a reminder that this fight was no longer dictated by raw power, but by discipline and strategy. Frustration clouded the fighter's eyes as Reacher circled with effortless control, dictating the tempo and flow. The veteran's quiet dominance silenced the bravado, turning the crowd's cheers into a chant of respect for the man who had patiently dismantled the challenger's assault. The tide had turned, and the fight was entering a new phase, one where experience and calm would define the outcome. The arena fell into a tense hush as the fight reached its climax. The young fighter, now visibly exhausted and breathing heavily, squared his shoulders for one last desperate assault. His eyes burned with determination and frustration, refusing to yield despite the mounting pressure. He swung wide, wild punches flying faster but less controlled, fueled by adrenaline and the fading hope of turning the tide. Reacher remained unmoved, his stance steady, eyes calm and focused. He waited, patient and poised, knowing the moment to act would come with perfect timing. The fighter charged forward, overcommitting in his final gambit, leaving himself open in a way he hadn't before. In a fluid motion, Reacher stepped forward, closing the distance in an instant. His fist shot out like a lightning bolt, connecting cleanly with the fighter's jaw. The impact echoed through the arena, a sharp crack that silenced the crowd for a split second. The young fighter's eyes widened in shock as his legs buckled beneath him. He crumpled hard onto the mat, the world tilting beneath him as the air rushed from his lungs. The referee moved quickly, signaling the end of the fight, while medics rushed in to check on the fallen warrior. The crowd erupted into a mix of stunned silence and roaring applause, the realization settling that the battle was over. Reacher stood over the downed fighter, expression unreadable but eyes steady and composed. He didn't raise his fists in victory or taunt his opponent. Instead, he exuded control, the quiet confidence of a man who had proven his skill without need for theatrics. The arena was filled with the sound of chants, cameras flashing, and fans on their feet. The fighters' camp scrambled to assist, while spectators whispered in awe, recognizing the significance of what they had witnessed. As Reacher nodded once toward the crowd and turned away, the message was clear. True strength required no boast, no noise, only mastery, discipline, and respect. The final strike was not just a physical blow, but the decisive end to a battle that had tested everything. The moment Reacher's final strike landed, the crowd exploded, a wave of noise that rippled through the arena like thunder. Fans leapt to their feet, some shouting his name, others silent in stunned disbelief. The energy shifted instantly from the fighter's earlier dominance to a celebration of Reacher's quiet, undeniable skill. Chants of Reacher, Reacher, grew louder, filling every corner of the packed venue. Phones lifted high captured the victorious moment from countless angles, broadcasting the image of the calm veteran standing over his fallen opponent. The crowd's reaction was a mix of awe and respect, an acknowledgement that they had witnessed something rare, not just a knockout, but a display of mastery. Some fans pounded the railings near the cage, their cheers wild and unrestrained. Others clapped slowly, their applause heavy with admiration for the veteran's composure. Even those who had supported the young fighter couldn't deny the skill and discipline that had won the night. Commentators scrambled to find words that could match the magnitude of the moment. Voices cracked with excitement as they described the fight's dramatic turnaround, highlighting Reacher's patience and precision. Social media feeds flooded with clips and reactions, turning the event into an instant viral sensation. In the midst of the chaos, the young fighter lay on the mat, blinking up at the bright lights, the shock of defeat settling in. Medics surrounded him, but his gaze flickered toward Reacher, a mixture of respect and disbelief in his eyes. The crowd's noise seemed distant to him now, replaced by the reality of being bested by a man who fought not with fury, but with quiet control. As the applause swelled and the chants echoed, Reacher acknowledged the crowd with a subtle nod. He didn't bask in glory or seek the spotlight. His victory spoke for itself. The arena had witnessed more than a fight. It had witnessed the triumph of discipline over bravado, calm over chaos, and respect earned quietly but unmistakably. Lying on the mat, the young fighter struggled to process the magnitude of his defeat. The roar of the crowd felt distant, almost muffled, as the weight of what had happened settled heavily on his chest. The confident smirk that had once defined him was replaced by a stunned silence, his breathing slow and uneven. For the first time, the certainty that had driven him now wavered under the undeniable truth. He had been outmatched. As medics tended to him, his eyes locked onto Jack Reacher's steady figure moving away from the cage. There was no boastful celebration, no aggressive posturing, only calm, controlled composure. That quiet strength struck a chord deep within the fighter, forcing a raw, uncomfortable reckoning. In the haze of exhaustion and pain, the fighter's mind replayed the fight's moments, each strike, each subtle counter, and every patient maneuver that had dismantled his aggression. He realized that sheer power and swagger were not enough to overcome skill forged in discipline and experience. The fight had not just been physical. It had been a lesson in respect, strategy, and humility. The young fighter's pride bruised more than his body, but beneath the sting lay a flicker of respect. He had entered the cage believing that noise and bravado could intimidate, that strength was shown through domination and spectacle. Now he understood that true strength was quieter, deeper, earned through patience, precision, and self-control. In the locker room later, away from the public eye, the fighter sat alone, wrestling with the revelation. The loss stung, but it also ignited a desire to learn, to grow beyond the shallow bravado that had carried him. The encounter with Reacher was a turning point, a harsh but necessary awakening. Though defeat tasted bitter, it carried the seed of transformation. The young fighter knew that to truly rise, he had to shed arrogance and embrace the discipline that had defined Reacher's legacy. It was a realization born in pain, but rich with possibility. the first step toward becoming more than just a showman. After the fight, Jack Reacher stood quietly in a small, dimly lit room backstage, away from the clamoring crowd and flashing cameras. Reporters and fans clamored for a statement, but Reacher's message was simple and direct when he finally spoke. Not about the victory, but about the principles that had guided him through every fight and every challenge. Strength